Welcome again. I was trying to enthuse us for the day. We've got an exciting day. And in fact, in some sense, something that I think we have all been asking for, knowing we need to do it, is going to happen this afternoon when we have our risk workshop, and we'll have PwC in here facilitating that. It was something that we had a wee bit of discussion off at the last meeting, so it's really superb. Thank you, James and Pauline, for getting that going. It will be good for us to actually start to develop the maturity of our work by trying to define those top 10 and working through it. But of course, we do have a good full agenda prior to that. So Nadine, Pauline, James, thank you to you and your teams for, again, a good set of papers. I've found it very useful as an external to be able to get a sense of what's happening in the place. So look, I would just like to do that. And also, Red, if I could just acknowledge, we were just trading. I was trying to isn't it dumb? I was trying to remember when I last heard Riet's name on national media, and of course it was because of the earthquake. So well done, you guys. Sounded like you got through it okay. I'm not saying it's necessarily easy to be woken in the middle of the night and worried, but well done, Riet. And it was great to see the leadership actually that was shown by the council that I could pick up from my distance where I was. Actually wasn't that far. I was in Tauranga of all places, but I didn't even feel it. So there we go. So look, that's brilliant to be here. Now, Karakia, there seems to be desire that it be shared round, and I thought it might have been Josh starting. Josh, are you happy to do it, or do I have another volunteer that would like to lead us? Josh, if you could do that, please, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Mana wa mai te mauri nuku, mana wa mai te mauri rangi. Kei au te mauri tipua, kei au te mauri tāhito, kei au te mauri nohia, no tiki tiki o rangi, o te whai oro ora o tāne te wai ora. Tēnei te mauri ka whakapiki, tēnei te mauri ka whakakaki. Tēnei te mauri ka puta ki te whai au ki te amarama, ki te matatauira e tuake nei. Uhi, wero, tau mai te mauri, haumi e hui e, tāki e.
Josh, appreciate that. Right, do we have any apologies? I haven't been given any, so I assume that looks like we're all here, isn't it? Yes, which is superb. We had some additional councillors last time, but I think we're all committee members here, so that's great. Are there any matters on the agenda that concern you in terms of your interests? There are none? We'll... Oh, who's it? Oh, that's right. I think Sandra was here last time. They're always great. Look, I as an external chair, I often have additional councillors. I would really encourage anybody that wished to come to it if they chose to. So it's a matter of time. But I look forward to welcoming Sandra when she gets here.
Can I say, Councillor Burdett, to you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Burdett expressed an interest in it, and I did point yesterday, and I said I'm sure, because councillors are invited to the workshop this afternoon, I'm sure he'd be welcome to sit in.
Yeah. Hey, one of the reason I say, amongst other things, I'm very happy is our work is a wee bit sort of behind, well, I can say behind closed doors, but it's just, you know, it happens. And actually our role is for the benefit of the whole of the council. And sometimes councillors to realise A, what we do, B, actually the fact that they need to take some comfort from our work, it actually means being here sometimes is quite helpful. So if people like Councillor Burdett or Councillor Faulkner are keen to be here, I'm very keen and welcome to have them here. And I should check standing orders, sorry James, but I'm always happy we hear their voice as well. In the course of it. So thank you. It'd be great to see, as I say, Sandra here, and if Councillor Burt's here later, that's superb as well. Could we look at the minutes, please? So that's the confirmation of the non-financial minutes, 16 December. So this was our pre-Christmas rush to get through the last one for the year. Look, from the chair, I'll move that we accept these as an appropriate record of that meeting. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Andy. Is there any discussion about matters of accuracy or recollection of that meeting? It looked like the meeting I was at. So is there anything people want to raise? Yes, Pat?
No matters of accuracy, but I just wondered on page 8 at 11.2, the health and safety team induction, the information would be included in the next report. And I haven't found it in this report. It's the second bullet point under 11.2.
I think that comes up, if I recall correctly, Pat, when we look at the action items subsequent to adoption of the minutes, there is a brief note in the action list about that, I think.
But it's not, we don't actually have the report. It does note
no, we don't have a report.
it.
So
It does note
I'm
it in
not
the
aware of
action
report.
item, but we don't actually have that report, I don't believe.
Correct. I made some assumption that that actually we were trying to be efficient and that was a sense of the reporting was there. If that's not adequate, I'm sure, James, we can
And
address that.
likewise, the two items, Mr. Chairman, the public transport at the top of page 7. And I know there's quite a bit of script about it and recognition of an element of risk, but it also does say, the first bullet point on page 7, that the report would be tabled at the committee's next meeting. And this is the committee's next meeting. But, there's a lot of script about it, but I don't, and discussion about what the options were, is that deemed to be the report? Because it's not actually saying we collected X, Y dollars from, ABC people or anything in that level of detail. It does tell us detail is not currently available. So are we saying that's the report? And if we are, that's fine. But I was looking for a slightly different kind of report.
And answer that, yes, that is the report.
That is the report?
That is the report.
Which
The
discusses gaps that we don't able to fill.
Because the third party collects the money and those things, and they take control of that. Ours is, what do we have as the oversight? So that's an important thing.
So let's pick up that item later. And Pat, if there is additional information needed, let's whether yes, James.
Sorry, can I just make a comment in relation to the health and safety report relating to the redeployment program? So there is some commentary in the action item and also in the next health and safety update, I think at point 17, but more importantly, any report of that nature full-fledged would follow the final report for test, which isn't due to go through until, I believe it's mid-April or towards the end of April.
On that, because I was involved with that last week, where the PDU has now seen the last report, which will be sent to them for sign-off. But because there was an extension, because some of the port, remember that there are 5 categories that are covered in the TESP, which there was some redeployment on roads, some trees removed. There's one of those that are still carrying on. I think 5 or 10 workers are still busy there. So there's been a little bit of a delay. So our last meeting would probably be in a month. That report would be signed off by the PDU, and then it will be presented to full council, and then this. That's my understanding.
Sorry, there is a comprehensive report coming back.
Can't hear you.
There is a comprehensive report coming back that outlines all these issues, from induction through to each party's contribution through to the outcomes of the project.
Thanks. All I'm saying is that, that's great. Thanks. I appreciate that. But that's not what this minute says. It says it was going to be here today. And then I've just got one third inquiry, and that is back on page 6. And if you recall, and it's around the committee was advised, and this is with respect to claims. The second National Emergency Management claim would be confirmed before Christmas. The third claim had been confirmed and invoiced. So have we received payment for both of those by now, please?
Can we pick that up under the internal audit section, Pat?
Sure.
Well, if you could recognise as an outstanding question here from Pat, that would be good. We do get to that when we deal with the internal audit reports. So, look, Pat, I agree and concur that we should keep up with what we say in the minutes, and actually disclosure of the reports is actually really important from the perspective of giving us as committee members assurance, which will about things that are key around risk. So thank you for that. Appreciate that.
And in respect to that, we do get a very comprehensive report with respect to that employment package from the CE and his CE report. But this is the Audit and Risk Committee. It's been set up for a reason, yes, and we should do what we say we're going to do. Thank you. Thank you,
Pat. So I'll put the motion that we adopt these minutes. Could I put that, please? All those in favour? Oh, did I have a seconder? Yes. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Andy. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. I think we probably just about dealt with the action items, so let's just check those ones off. I'm on page 11 of our agenda. So the fraud, corruption and bribery policy we've got in front of us this today, so which is tremendous to see. We'll have a good chat about that. Health and safety. That is both a combination, and this goes back to perhaps what I thought you may be making, Pat, around 173 workers inducted and something from David here. We've talked already about disclosure reports. We have a chance also to meet with David later this morning as well if we need to amplify on that. And then there is the long-term plan update on significant forecasting assumptions. Again, we do have an item later in the report, but there was a request for this information, so we have it here. Right, are there any other matters in terms of actions arising along with Pat's broader request early on? Is there anything else we need to cover? There isn't. Let's move on then to, let me see, I'm still on the draft fraud, corruption and bribery policy on page 13 of our agenda. Melanie, are you taking us through this, or you're welcome to come to, it might be good, can you come to the table please? You just feel like you're too far away there, sorry, from my God anyway.
Thank you. The draft fraud, corruption and bribery policy, we've looked at a number of other councils' policies and developed one to suit GDC. It's fairly standard, but we have got a couple of points of difference that we've put in there, which is around the conflicts of interest, and often fraud or bribery can occur in those sort of instances. And also we've got the EAP service, which allows staff to make the anonymous disclosures. So once the policy is approved, we will put it up on our Know My banner and have that advertised there, and also have a Q&A session for staff. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly, appreciate that. It's been a key theme from within the public sector that we as risk committees are often aware of the issue of fraud, but actually behaviours that might get to the area of corruption and bribery have been less well covered. So we're bringing our policies up to speed with good practice. So that's tremendous. So look, I'd like to open the floor to people for questions, Pat, or points. Pat, I think you have one.
Thank you. I'm happy to approve the draft policy, but I just wasn't curious, and I haven't gone back and looked at it in relation to our own code of conduct, but if you look on page 15 at item 9, I just wondered what opportunity there was for councillors to disclose. It's all very well, and absolutely right and proper that council officers need a process, but don't councillors need one too?
Agreed. I'd love to have a discussion about this because if I could add to that, the policy excludes councillors, and I'm not convinced that's the best way because, to be honest, councillors, even possibly me, should be subject to clearly the issues around bribery, corruption, and fraud in the policy. So
but they also should be in a position to make an anonymous disclosure, which is also what I'm flagging.
Agreed. Yes, that's right. So there are a couple of ways. Well, actually, no, Mel, perhaps I should say, what are you intending on here in terms of Gisborne? I should say I can think from a systems perspective ways, but Mel, have you got views on this, please? Or James, somebody?
It's covered in our code of conduct.
I said I hadn't had time to go back and look and see if it is. And is anonymous, can I ask you through the chair, Mr. Chairman, is anonymous disclosure covered in the code of conduct? I don't think so. Is it?
Yeah, that's whistleblowing.
Right, that's fine, thank you.
Who do you blow your whistle to?
Exactly.
That's what we will talk about tomorrow when we do the code of conduct tomorrow. We're adopting the new code of conduct.
Oh, you are? Oh, great. Great. Actually, I'm here tomorrow. I'll be interested to see how you go on that because can I just say, totally irrelevant topic at hand, but I've been interested in what you're doing around social media. I hope your code of conduct's dealing with that, but that's a different issue, Nadine, and I know we won't do tomorrow's business today. Okay, so look, perhaps a point that I'm making, perhaps it's also picked up by Pat, which is actually nothing wrong in a sense with this policy, but whether we are correct to actually exclude the elected member portion of council, because the behaviours and even indeed the sorts of controls that are inherent in this should in my view apply to elected members as well. Indeed, dare I say, appointees such as myself to a council committee. Red, you've got a question.
So I've got two questions of the CEO. So the first one is, or whoever wrote the mail, why are elected members excluded? Is it standard practice across, and we are covered by the LGA, so that's just standard? Thank you. Next, I assume this is a brand new policy. We haven't had anything before. To the CEO, how did you deal with issues like this before we had a clear policy? What guidelines were there? Best practice guidelines, or what did council use before this? Because it's great to see this going forward, but what were your tools before this?
A really good question through the chair. So the elements were in place in terms of the employment contract with myself as the employer, with information that we shared around bribery and corruption, and putting up some information around fraud, invisible places, and who people could contact, but it wasn't all in one formal policy. So this now brings everything together and provides clarity.
So you had all these components,
Yes.
they were just not pulled
That's
into
right.
one place. Thank you.
Thank you, Red. Are there any other questions here, Larry?
Good to see this total transparency with this policy. My question is, are we going to, is there any way that we can do incident reporting as far as like in conjunction with how we do it with health and safety? Don't mention any names, but we have a severity criteria and we have numbers on it, so we can actually gauge what's going on in here. You know, so at the moment in the policy, there's nothing about reporting. So I would like to.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Mel, is there any comment you'd like to make on that? That's a very good point.
Yeah, we definitely can do reporting. So far, since we've had the EAP hotline set up, there haven't been any anonymous disclosures as yet, but we will certainly put that on our agenda list.
I had just wondered about the sort of the reporting and accountability lines. I mean, for instance, in the case of any suspected fraud, at the very least, dare I say it, I as the independent chair should be informed of any suspicion, let alone any actual fraud. So perhaps that's an area that could be tackled. Obviously, suspected fraud tends to absolutely rock through an organisation with real concerns. So it's wise that there is appropriate channels, not just after the event, Larry, but actually in the course of it, where there's a level of protection for the organisation, that there is a level of oversight. So that's good. But yes, post the event, reporting becomes really, really important. Okay, any other points folk would like to raise? I've got a couple of questions, Mel. And it's more about refinement, by the way, not about, I mean, I think it's great. We've got, in fact, the conversation we're having reflects the value of actually getting the policy up and running. So I've backed up Pat and Riet's view that around particularly the scope of this should include, I think, at least ostensibly the elected members. Can I ask a question, slightly pointy-headed, but if I go to page 19 of our agenda, we say council will make, this is under the policy, it says 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth bullet point down, council will make every effort to gather sufficient reliable evidence to support either disciplinary action and or in serious cases of fraud, a prosecution. I don't have any trouble with the sentiment of that. What's our attitude in the event of suspected fraud and our relationship with the police? Sorry?
It doesn't say and or, it just says or. When you read it out, it says and or. It actually says or in serious cases of
Yes,
fraud.
sorry.
Prosecution
Did I say
is pretty
and or? Sorry, my mistake.
I guess you're
I
asking
was
the
too
chief
loose.
executive the degree to which is she deemed serious. Is that what you're saying?
I'm wanting to reflect in terms of if there is a suspected fraud, which by its nature is one of criminal intent, how do we deal with that in relationship to the police? Do we have a policy that suspected fraud is taken to the police?
Yes, in the procedures, it does state that the chief executive will assess, and it'll either be referred to legal or referred to the serious fraud office, etc., or the police.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's reasonably important, and thank you for pointing it out to me, Mel. That's reasonably important that actually we have in effect a zero tolerance, and that matters are put in the hands of police when we have good grounds to suspect fraud, rather than, as I have seen elsewhere, where I must confess, when I first read this, I was wondering whether we were thinking, well, we will only take the serious stuff to the police. I think that's inappropriate. It needs to be all matters of suspected fraud if we've got reasonable grounds to suspect it. And that's the point I think you're making here, so I agree with that.
So through the chair, so there is a process of an independent investigator that comes into before we go to the police. So there's a step in between there before you excel to the police.
Brilliant. Right, that was, oh, sorry, Andy?
Is there an awareness by the contractors? I mean, if worst case scenarios when you're talking this sort of discussion, if a contractor was offered a little bit of putia by staff to get something done back the other way, have they got an awareness of this sort of policy and what they would need to do in that space?
That's an interesting point, Nadine.
Yes, so through the chair, no, they haven't, because we haven't adopted the policy in this case. And I suspect that those that will be engaging in fraud and bribery and corruption wouldn't be sharing that openly with them. So that would be something following the adoption of this that we would need to push through our contractor networks around what our expectations are around staff conduct.
So is there intention to go through the contracting process? Is there a line in there that lets them know that they're part of this policy?
I would have to come back to be able to respond to that. I'm not clear whether our current contracts would have. I would expect there to be, and there usually is a generic clause in there around conflicts of interest, but we will need to check specific wording that's in those that we have.
I wonder if I could actually help there, Andy. I should know, but I don't. Do we have a gifts policy? Because this is, Andy, the primary area where, in terms of contractors, there is a cultural issue about what is the nature of gifts. You know, ticket to the rugby, coffee, the Christmas ham, which was what tripped over the footpath contract in Auckland Council a number of years ago. Those are the sorts of, you know, to be honest, I'm about to say run of the mill. I don't mean it as run of the mill, but those are the sorts of core influences, albeit that yes, there is, and we've had that at Auckland Transport, again, it's public, substantial fraud with contractors. So partly it's having an appropriate gifts policy and the culture we have in the organisation about how to interpret that. I mean, there are some councils I know that, you know, basically say you can't have coffee with a contractor. You know, and those are the sorts of settings that actually, for Nadine in particular and the team, that need to be worked through. So yeah. So there needs to be the related policies that go with a fraud, bribery and corruption policy. Right. Anything else that we need to say here? Oh, sorry, Terry.
So the ultimate responsibility sits with the CEO. What's the process or position around this if there's questions around the CEO? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And that actually places a very difficult position for any staff member.
Well, he's going to take the boss on, sort of. Yeah, like, I mean, this is much about protecting our CEO.
Exactly.
But yeah.
Your policies are about protection of each other, not necessarily detection.
So through the chair, that is why we have the whistleblower component of the policy in place. So it provides staff or anyone else, I would expect to be able to access that in an anonymous way. And that would then be escalated to the mayor.
Should that sit within this document? In that case, the
So-
whistleblower content of the code of conduct would prevail.
Yeah, so it does.
I read this out.
So you're asking for like a separate section on what if the CEs?
Or does, no, this, I just want to understand.
Yeah. So the policy itself covers staff, which would be myself. And then the whistleblower policy or the process in there is the connection into the EAP. So that's the safety hotline.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Is there anything else?
No, it's fine. I'm just trying to think how that works.
I think the point is, if we look at the way that firstly, well done on having the EAP and compliance hotline. I think that's really important. I think the organisations I see that are concerned about the integrity of performance, Terry, have something like this, something external that enables issues to be raised. In reading the policy, the question is what happens then if a matter is raised to the EAP hotline, and if I recall correctly, it goes to our HR manager, correct? And then senior management are informed. It would have to be clear for the HR manager that if it was a matter affecting, let's say, senior staff, let alone Nadine, they're going to have to track to REIT, and I'd like to suggest myself. Because again, that's a sensitive situation where that should be. So thinking about it, Mel, if those procedures aren't clear, and Terry, thank you for raising, I think we have to allow for the exception. And unfortunately, there is the odd time when chief executives' actions have become subject to question. So that would be wise. Right. Any other points that folk would like to raise from this? It's got us going and thinking, and actually what I'm really encouraged by is that we as a committee are keen to see a good effective policy. So thank you for that. So look, I think from this point, I guess we want to turn our eyes to the resolution and what we are doing, because I think we've given you some work-ons. Is this a situation, Mel, where you would like to, shall we say, withdraw and come back, or is this better, Nadine, that we actually have let's call it a interim policy in place till you come back with an updated one? We have an interim policy in place? Right, so if we could then move to the resolution. Just got to find it. Which is, where am I? Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I'm struggling with a couple of matters here. Okay, so it approves the draft fraud, bribery and corruption policy. Why don't we just add as the interim policy at the end of this, so that it's clear it's interim, subject to further refinement. Just happy with that? So would somebody like to move that, please? Thank you, Pat, and I've got Terry's here. Thank you, Pat and Terry. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour that we approve this in draft as an interim, all those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you. I should be using my laptop, which is what I've reviewed this whole thing on, rather than anything else. So and I'll keep myself in order. Can we please move to the next item, which is on page 27 of your agendas, which is the audit plan with Ernst and Young. And somewhere in the ether, hopefully we have David and Lauren with us, who are here to speak to us about it. Are we able to know whether that's the case at this stage?
Morning, are you able to hear us?
I can hear a voice behind me. Ah, look at that. There we are. We've got a couple of people, David and Lauren. That's superb. Right, if I could wonder, Pauline, would you like to lead us firstly, please? Oh, can I just welcome, let me look there. So David, Lauren, can you hear us okay?
Are you able to hear us? We can hear you.
Sorry, can you hear us, David and Lauren?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Is there a way to turn it up? Right. Hopefully we've got you. Can you just say hi again, please, David? Just make sure we can get you.
Is that any better in terms of volume?
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, thank
Perfect.
you.
Morning all.
Thank you, David and Lauren, for being here. Welcome, and we appreciate being able to find time to be with us, because I know it's a busy time for auditors. And if I can just pass on to the committee, David, in good auditor fashion, rang me prior to the meeting yesterday, so we've had some discussion about it, and I'm very keen that we let David have his say on his plan, and actually also to introduce Lauren, I suggested, given Lauren is the new manager. So David, sorry, Pauline, firstly, is there anything that you should say to your people? I'll go straight to David.
No, not really. I think David can say it far better than
Brilliant.
what I can.
Okay. David, we're in your hands.
Perfect, thank you. And what I might do is start by acknowledging that there are large parts of our planned program of audit work that are reasonably consistent with the program of work that we've delivered in the past. So what Lauren and I will do is focus on a couple of areas where there are elements that are new or different, but then definitely very happy to take questions from the committee on any elements of the plan at all. So starting with infrastructure assets, which is on page 4 of our plan, or page 32 of papers. This is an area of focus for us because of both the high dollar values involved, but also because the assets facilitate the delivery of core services to the community. Some of our work in this space will be reasonably similar to the work that we have carried out in previous years. So an example of that would be where we look to validate the key inputs to the year-end valuations of assets. And that's us looking at the size and nature and number of assets being valued and validating that, and then also examining the unit costs that are applied to those assets in the valuation process. An element of our work around infrastructure assets that will be different this year relates to the audit work that we've recently completed over the past 4 to 5 months over the long-term plan. And through that program of audit work, we've had a greater degree of visibility to the condition and performance of the council's infrastructure assets. And what we'll be looking to do come year end is to check that that information has been fully reflected in the year end valuations, which are done on an optimized depreciated replacement cost basis. So things like condition in particular are really important to the valuation. What I might do now is get Lauren, who will be managing the audit, to just talk briefly about grants and subsidies, which is another area where there are elements that are new.
Well, thanks, Dave. So grants and subsidies is on page 7 of our audit plan report. So I guess the key area of focus for us this year, which is more wide than previous years, is that there's a number of different funding sources this year, being Provincial Growth Fund, the shovel-ready projects from the government announcement last year, and the Tairāwhiti Economic Support Program, which all have a number of different obligations to consider. So our focus will be around how the revenue is recognised in line with the accounting standards, and also how council's monitoring the compliance of those grants, both in terms of the obligations that the grant have and the spend against each of the different grants.
So we might leave it there in terms of initial things that we wanted to touch on, but very happy to pick up on any elements of the plan that are of particular interest to the committee.
Right, so thank you for that, David. If I can perhaps just note, we've got 5 key items that David and Lauren are saying will feature around their audit, as well as the standard suite of work that they would do in arriving at an audit and opinion. Are there questions folk would like to raise at this point about the plan? Yes, Pat. No, you're welcome to. Well, I'll always follow because I've got comments as well. So don't worry, Pat, you and I are going well here.
Thank you very much for being part of the meeting today. I just have a couple of questions. I think it would be helpful for everyone. I'm looking at page 33, your page 5. Can you just lay out an example for us of testing the controls over the rates levying process to assess whether these are operating effectively? So what are you actually going to do to assure yourselves and ultimately us as councillors that that process is operating effectively. In layman's terms, thanks.
And I mean, that process really starts for us in terms of thinking about controls with the rates that come to council for approval ahead of any given financial year. So the first step for us is having visibility to those council papers, being able to understand what rates were adopted for a particular year, given that in itself was a control. And then I guess most importantly, being able to step through the subsequent detailed steps to understand how those rates that have been approved by council at a council meeting are then both reflected in the underlying system, but then beyond that, also that after being reflected in the system, they are then correctly applied to invoices that go out the door to ratepayers. And the way that we do that is we effectively test specific examples. So in short, pick individual ratepayers and check that we are able to trace from the invoice that's gone to that ratepayer the components that make up their total rating amount to those amounts that are in council's system, and then again trace that back to the rating factors that were adopted by council at the relevant council meeting.
Thank you. And supplementary, then how many actual rating demands or to a ratepayer would you test, and would you do them across a spectrum of urban, rural, business, residential? Just exactly how does that process work, please?
So the sample that's selected is a random sample, but invariably it will include a mix of all of those different kinds of ratepayers.
Thank you. And then I just have a second question, which is actually on page 7, and the Chief Executive might just clarify it, but it's on the planned audit approach and examine funding received from the Crown in respect of the Olympic swimming pool. And I'm not sure that we've actually received money yet from the Crown. So can we just be clear,
Yes, that's correct.
the pool and climate resilience, and ensure the funding's been recognised appropriately? Can maybe the Chief Executive can clarify that first, and then I'm interested to know what that process is. Thanks.
Yes, so I can clarify in terms of the $40 million, we haven't received that. We're front loading that project, so we may not, I'll have to check the milestones as to when the Crown Infrastructure Partners funding comes on stream, but I think that's next year. And the other one in terms of the Waipawa River flood control, I'll have to get Ms. Foreman to comment as to whether we've received funding for that 7.5 million.
Yes, we have. We've received just a little over 2 million for the Waipawa, and we've spent, we've got roughly about 540,000 left of that funding.
Thank you. That brings to mind, through the chair, supplementary questions with respect to the Olympic pool and front loading it. It might be the wrong time for me to ask, and maybe the chairman will guide me, and we might just ask it later with the course, during the course of the audit committee, because that will be a front loading that was not planned for, I would suggest, and potentially quite a large sum of money. So this council needs to understand, I believe, or the Audit and Risk Committee needs to understand what that is, implications of that are to the rest of our council activity for certainly for the year 2021. It might be different for the year 21-22.
So through the chair, that money was planned for, and through our long-term plan, we had accounted for 5.6 million in there. So that is not, so that has been.
We're only going to use that much.
Correct.
Thank you. Thanks.
And
thank you.
Bearing in mind, Pat, I do like your question. I think it's a really important question, and I'm grateful David and Lauren are focusing on this. And that's because we'll discuss this afternoon, amongst other times. I don't know if you have an agenda item tomorrow. This is an area of what I consider high risk for us as a council, because of the context with which we have got the money. And actually the undoubted expectation, in my view, again, from outside council, that we will deliver at pace because of the nature of the way in which this money has come. So it's a significant one. David, Lauren, I'm very grateful in the way, and I perhaps you can even sense that from Pat's questioning, a very hot topic for us, let alone the flood control schemes and other money that we get. So that's important. there any other points? Yes, Andy.
It's kind of following on from that a bit. And looking forward to next year's audit, it may be a little bit out of scope, but we're in an incredibly high inflationary environment at the moment. How would the auditors look in a year's time and assess things that are happening to us through the super high inflationary period we've got going on at the moment, which, you know, we've got 81 million in infrastructure assets and things, you know, huge numbers, and really struggling with that inflation.
Understood and agreed. And I guess the impact of that is pretty pervasive across the things that we consider as part of our audit. There are some elements of that that will be dealt with in a factual sense in terms of operating costs will increase as a result of that, but our validation process covers that off ordinarily in terms of it's pretty factual when the costs are in the past. I think the key piece that impacts of most importance is around infrastructure assets, and that's coming from the perspective that council carries those assets at their fair value, and the matter that you've referenced around inflation and the cost of replacing those assets is directly relevant because that's the basis on which they are valued, their replacement cost. So that's the area where it would have most pertinence for us. And as I mentioned earlier, there are two important parts of the work we do around the valuation of infrastructure assets. One is looking at the underlying information for the assets themselves and their nature, and then the other element is the cost factors that are applied to those, and that's where that would come in as a key consideration.
So can I also add to that, because there are two things here that really count. One is, and I totally agree with David, the pressure will come on us in terms of the fair value of the assets and how we carry them. But then there's also the strategic financial management aspects of that, because, and if we go back to David's very appropriate plan on assets on, you find the page, it's page 4 of his, sorry, it's 32 of our agenda. When you look at the bottom right-hand column, you start to see some of the work he does, because it starts to affect actually how do we calculate depreciation, what's its value, you know, what should our renewal rate be. It's actually really important. So you raise a good point. I agree entirely with David, but it does mean from a strategic financial management perspective as a council, Pauline and her team will be running madly along with David to actually see what are the strategic contexts of what you have just raised. It's an important point. Any other points that people would like to make? Can I just ask, or just make one point, please, David, and I've thought about this overnight since we've last spoken. Last year, of course, COVID was significant on our plate, and it was on your audit program as well. We don't have that as a key item this year, but I just wonder if we're missing a trick. We are going to be reporting on the year to 30 June 2021, and actually our non-financial performance is a critical part of our accountability. And I just wonder, Nadine, you'll have a stronger sense of this than I do, whether in fact some of our metrics could be affected by COVID. That doesn't, I think, mean much, other than I think we do need to faithfully reflect that even in the 2021 year, COVID could impact on us in terms of what we report in the non-financial area, rather than what was the big concern last year was that COVID would indeed affect our financial performance. So look, I just pass that on for what it's worth, but I am very conscious about the non-financial side as well, being an equal part of our accountability. I don't know whether you have any comments on that, David.
Completely agree with that sentiment, and I think there will be implications of COVID on both the non-financial side in terms of performance reporting, and also on the financial side in terms of some of the economic assistance that council will have received during the year as a result of COVID. At the moment, our intention in terms of dealing with those matters and then reporting back at the conclusion of the audit is to capture those matters in the relevant sections of our reporting around performance reporting or grant funding if that's where the items sit, but we'll also give some consideration when we do our reporting at the conclusion of the audit, whether it also warrants a separate section reporting back on COVID alone. So happy to give that some consideration, but completely agree with your sentiment.
Now, one thing that I'm going to beat David to the gun here that he will probably ask us is actually, is there any other matter than these 5, and perhaps I've raised COVID, that you as a committee are concerned about and would like to draw David and Lauren's attention to? There isn't? Good. Well, look, in terms of process here, David and Lauren are working to an existing engagement arrangement that we have approved previously. I think this is year 2 of that standard arrangement, which has been agreed with the Office Auditor General. So the sort of the normal rums and rations, in other words, fees, etc., have all been settled. We don't have to worry about that at this stage. So in effect, I'd like to draw us into the resolution, which is simply that we note the contents of the report. I've got that right on page 28. Can I just check, Pauline? We don't have to sign any letter at this stage to David and Lauren, so there's nothing we're recommending be signed. It's merely we can note this on the basis that this is the plan. Good. Sorry, and before we move to the motion, I should have asked one other question. While the fee might be right, have we got timing okay? Are we comfortable with the timing and delivery of the annual report this year? Bearing in mind this is the 3rd engagement that you and David have had on the trot in the course of the last 18 months.
For the chair, we are still going to go back and just have a look at that, because one of the things, the adopting report is the 30th of September, whereas last year it was the 24th of September. So there is a little bit of a time within that program to say, does it change, does it relax some of the things? But we need to agree on both of us what that does and where we can put it into the things.
But we're still anticipating essentially a September sign-off.
That's correct.
Brilliant, brilliant. That's good. No, that's very good performance to do that, and obviously get Gisborne Holdings lined up as well. That's even better. So that's superb. So look, we're back to the end of the original motion, sorry, which is that we note the report. As we said, there's nothing else to do about it. Can I have somebody prepared to move that, please? Thank you, Riet, and thank you, Josh. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. David, Lauren, thank you for your time, folk. As I say, I suspect in the madness of long-term planning and audits, you're probably busy as. You're welcome to stay if you wish, but equally totally accept and also probably expect you need to move through. So thank you and appreciate your time this morning.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Sandra, it's been quite remiss of me not to welcome you to our meeting. That's no worry. You're most welcome. And look, I'd certainly encourage you, if you'd like to raise questions or points, please do so. It's you're most, as I say, welcome here, and I'd be happy to hear your voice if you wanted to raise issues. Can we please look at item on page 21 of 39, the long-term plan update and significant forecasting assumptions. And I just wonder who's going to take us through that. We got somebody? Charlotte. Charlotte would like to come to the front, please. While Charlotte's coming to the front, I would like to hear your views. Clearly, Charlotte, you're the writer of the report and probably very key to this total process. I'm conscious that tomorrow you get to look at the consultation document. One of the things, and for reasons which I can disclose later, I would like to just spend a few moments going through the appendix to Charlotte's very good report, which relates to the key assumptions, because they're always with us right up until the 30th of June. Charlotte, I'm in your hands, please. Can you make certain, please, that your microphone's on?
Apologies. There's sort of 2 components to this report. The first is really an update on the long-term plan in general, and the second is the significant forecasting assumptions. So, I mean, in terms of an update on the long-term plan, there's probably not much point in going in too deeply, given the tomorrow at council there is the adoption of the consultation document. But suffice to say, this report just gives a bit of a rundown of where we are at, and as well as the auditors looking at the upcoming audit plan, we are also at the point where they have given their closing report on the consultation document. So we've been working through that with them. And then the next phase from here, once the report is adopted tomorrow, we move into the consultation phase. And then, as you can see at the end of the report, it mentions the timeframes upcoming, and that we have the consultation period for 1 month. And then we have the submissions, the hearings process and deliberations in May. And then following that, audit will come back for their final audit of the long-term plan. But one of the components of the long-term plan process is to update the significant forecasting assumptions. And what we've done at this point is to provide an update on the last time that the forecasting assumptions were provided, which is in December, and that is the attachment that Charlotte has worked through. But at a high level, not a great deal has changed from the last set of assumptions that were provided in December, except for this section on capital doability, which is what the auditors sort of fairly late in the audit process requested. I think across the board, they wanted all councils around the country to have a closer look at how they are meeting or how they are delivering their asset programs, in terms of what percentage of the asset program that they had outlined in the previous plan that they would have delivered over those 3 years, and then looking forward, the assumptions that we would be looking to make in terms of how much we'd expect to deliver of our capital works program. So perhaps at that point, Charlotte can then speak to the attachment itself. Thank you.
Do you want me to go over anything in particular? Otherwise, we can just go through as questions if you prefer.
Okay, so look, thank you for that. Sorry, it's Tim, is it? Yeah, Tim, nice to meet you. So look, appreciate that, and you have anticipated where I want to go to, which is really to the appendix, or actually what is the criticality of the assumptions. Tomorrow you get the chance to grab that CD and kick it out for consultation, which is superb. The reason that I wanted to focus on the assumptions is that the statutory obligation on council and as elected members, that's who I mean, is that actually you are comfortable that the long-term plan that you adopt, and I think the date's the 30th of June exactly, is your best estimates of what the future will look like. And the most critical part in that is actually the assumptions. So I think it seems obvious, if I can reflect my work elsewhere, that there are 1 or 2 assumptions that actually we probably need to keep our eye on up until somewhere near 30 June. If I can give you an example, for a council that is facing growth at the moment, and I'm thinking particularly of one of my responsibilities, Waipa, actually how growth plays out in the next 3 months is really critical in terms of their infrastructure plans, in terms of their level of service performance. They will do a full review of that assumption before they adopt it at 30 June. Now, I'm not suggesting we have that here, Nadine, not necessarily about growth or about any assumption, other than, Tim, you are pointing this to possibly or probably the most sensitive assumption that's in here. So I would just like us to perhaps almost page turn through the appendix just to check that we as elected officials are comfortable with actually the state of where these assumptions are at and the information we have. It may be, as I say, that they're all fine. We can have a plain sailing to 30 June. Equally, there may be things that we see as being more sensitive there. Okay, we just flicked it, so I'm on page 55 of the agenda. And look, let's just do it as a page turn. If you've got a question, just raise it, because actually I think it's really important so that we are all agreed. So 55 is clearly dealing with community health, a generally broad concern, but actually, as you can see there in red, impact on revenue. Folk are happy with that. Likely to change between now and 30 June? Probably not. Levels of service. Any comment that we're going to make on that over the next couple of pages? This is where we do come into, in effect, part of the impact that Tim's already raising about capital delivery, because that is actually one of our primary drivers around maintaining, if not enhancing, levels of service. Yes, Andy?
It's probably a Dave question, really. There's concern around the getting out there and sealing roads and then having to revert them back to metal. So is that going to be a significant kilometre of roading, or, you know, is that a given? I mean, it's going to be pretty horrific for the people that are using those roads to have finally got them sealed, and then we're stating here that we're going to then revert them back to metal. So yeah, just some info on that would be great.
Is that an assumption, or is that something that you've built into your infrastructure strategy already?
It's included in the levels of service assumption towards the end, but I'll pass that to Pauline or Dave to talk to about the.
It has been flagged. Can I supplement Councillor Cranston's question? It has been flagged intermittently, and we're aware of it, but the scope of it is not alluded to specifically in here. So maybe we can ask, is that likely to?
Through the chair.
When is the scope likely to be known?
Through the chair, the reversion of roads is where we're talking about problematic sealed sections of roads, normally on low volume passenger vehicles, but high volume heavy vehicle roads where we aren't able to save those roads. So this is some of the worst sections of sealed network where actually, given the damage of the heavy vehicles, we'll revert sections of those roads. So we're not talking about reverting a full road. We're talking about sections where things are failing, that we would revert them back to metal so that we're able to maintain it in a cheaper fashion. And actually for some of them, it may be more suitable. We wouldn't revert any roads outside people's houses until we've done full consultation and understand the full effects of what that would mean for them.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, Larry.
Yes, I just want to go back to a previous page, actually, the top of page 48, and it's something that you said before about growth and the importance of understanding and the accuracy of it. And we've got a statement here: once New Zealand statistics have provided the population mesh figures for Gisborne, a further update will be provided at our next meeting. My question is, what is population mesh figures? Is that just the population? No.
So that's that smaller sort of area-based data rather than the whole region itself. So it goes down into the area, they're called mesh blocks, and they've got some different areas that are defined by Stats New Zealand rather than by us. So we use them when looking at particularly outside of the city and some of the rural areas where there might be. So overall, we see our population trending upwards, but there might be some areas where it may be staying the same or going down a little bit. So that's how we use that data.
Okay, so and you can group the whole lot together to get a total overview of the region. Because why I'm asking is because we had so many conflicting figures. We had 49,100. We have other people assuming it's over 50,000, but we haven't narrowed it down because there's been no census to what we're actually doing. And one would expect us to be growing dramatically looking around, but it would be really nice to nail an actual figure to where we're at.
Yeah, so those mesh block figures will be based on the census data and the census population.
The 2013 census?
No, 2018 one.
Well, that wasn't even a very good census anyway, so that was, okay.
There is a lot of
Bring one on.
angst in the sector about that, Larry. But look, I think this reflects the fact that, again, just exactly why we're going through this. It's actually about what assumptions could change. And so the fact that Charlotte and Tim are bringing back to us the latest updated figures in June means hopefully that doesn't give rise to suddenly we need to change drastically our direction. Nadine, you'll be tearing your hair out if that's the case. But it's actually just indicating some of the sensitivity we have around it. Yes, Pat.
I'd just like to talk about water supply capital program delivery, which is on page 60. Because I just think it's, I mean, I don't think we need to be doing any more than we are, but I just think it potentially is a high level of uncertainty if we're expected to follow what is the government is suggesting around the water connections for rural townships. And we do put in here a little bit about, if we look under alignment with our 2050 key challenges, it's a challenge to create connected and safe community rural settlements and infrastructure. And I just think we don't want to create something that, an expectation of something that we aren't able to deliver. And I'd rather see us temper that even more, because I just can't see, even with all the best will in the world, that we are going to be able to create reticulated water supplies to some of our rural townships.
So this attachment only includes some of the assumptions which had the changes in them, but we do have an assumption around the 3 water reform program and the wider assumptions document, which alludes to that. In terms of the level of uncertainty, that low in particular is around the assessment that we needed to do for audit, and that table's in the report. So that's where the level of uncertainty comes from. And that's how audit test it, is based on your past performance in terms of delivering, so actual versus budget.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, sorry, Josh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on page 56, I think it is, just around the assumptions for the LTP service demand for green spaces. First off, Charlotte, tēnā korua. Nice to see you this morning. Just in regards to that specific assumption, it does say there, because when I first read it, I was like, this is in contradiction to stuff that we've already heard from our community. So I just want to ask about what informs this assumption. And I do note that there's the Burrell report, local government cost adjuster factors, where you, I guess, essentially utilize that report to say that recreation facilities are likely to see increased demand from residents. Is that localized information in that Burrell report, or is that nationalized information?
No, so this one comes from a national trend, but we did check in with the team locally, and they have said that they have seen that to some degree here as well, in terms of the usage of parks and reserves. But we don't necessarily have, you know, concrete data that we can use for the evidence. Yeah, it's more anecdotal.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I want to challenge the assumption, because up until now, all previous information has said that there, and through the community facility strategy, with myself and Councillor Cranston both sat on, was that green spaces were being underutilised. Specific key areas, say like the hockey turf, were overutilised, and had to be strategic about those things. But generally, overall, we had lots of green spaces that had lots of underutilized periods of time. So I'm just trying to get just trying to get how this assumption informs that LTP moving forward, because because it currently reads wrong to me. I'm not saying that we have blended into it's wrong, but it goes against every other piece of information I've received before.
Yeah. So that was part of the feedback that we got back from the committee last time around this particular assumption, and in terms of better incorporating the past work that we've done with the community facility strategy. So we've changed the second part of the assumption. It goes over into page 57. And it talks about the rationalisation project in accordance with the community facility strategy, and that's still going ahead due to the high level of green space that we do have as a council. Does that go some way to answering the tension?
And I do agree with where we're going at. My concern, Mr. Chair, is about the conversation we end up having with the community. We've kind of been saying, man, we've got lots of these things and they're very expensive for us to manage as a council. But then also in here we're going, it's kind of saying we need more of these things. It's like we're saying one thing and the other thing.
Maybe if I could comment through the chair. So what this is getting at really is a balanced approach to it. So on one hand, we're saying growth is a key assumption in here, and it's putting pressure on a lot of things. And then we've got these abundance of open, green spaces. We were going with this is that we need to align it with our overall strategy. So the community facility strategy is one of them. Because what we don't want to do is the assumption being that we're going to not opt out, but reduce the amount of green spaces in support of growth without a planned approach to it. We may find ourselves in another predicament that we don't want when we've lost our green spaces. So I think what this assumption is getting to is that we're going to take a balanced and planned approach to that issue that you're raising, if that helps clarify.
Yeah, that does help. And furthermore, I think that would be great if that, I guess, was the conversation that we're having with our community, considering that this is going to be the document that informs how we have those convos with our community.
The critical thing here is I hear your point about shall we say a variable possibility in where the assumption actually lands, and it's going to be dependent on your events. The critical question is actually at the moment, have you pitched this correctly within your levels of service? Recognising that they might move, and I think you're perhaps here the issue maybe is the level of uncertainty or the risk around the assumption low, medium or high, and that would probably become the critical question. And really for the point I'm trying to make, is it likely that this assumption would move between now and 30 June? Probably not, because you're waiting to see how the future events go. So that's very helpful, Josh. And I think that's been a good discussion to think about the sensitivity of this assumption, albeit it may not change the plan as it stands at the moment, that would go forward. I think I'm up to page 59 and 60, which has got the various capital delivery elements under the plan. Tim's mentioned at the start about some upgraded information around doability of the plans. Pat's raised some of the challenges around funding, and I think that's been covered there. Is anything else about doability that committee would like to raise? That puts me on to 63, which is water security and supply. That's interesting, isn't it? But we have here presumably pitched the level of services we see it stands at the moment based on the information we have. I suspect that is unlikely to change between now and 30 June. Availability of contractors and materials, that's part of a sort of a sub-theme with doability. Is that likely to move between now and 30 June? David, I wonder whether you'd have a view on that. No, we're pretty comfortable. We know where we stand on that at the moment. Yep, correct. I hear nods, see nods over there. Provincial Growth Fund. We've already discussed that in effect today around matters like the Olympic pool. The assumption is that we will essentially meet conditions. What do we actually say the level of uncertainty was medium? Can I ask that? Is there a confidence in our own systems ourselves, or is there something there that I'm
No,
missing?
so when we initially wrote the assumptions and assigned it the uncertainty level of high, it was in the environment and post-COVID and the recovery where some contracts were being taken back, etc.
Yeah.
So that was the context of the environment then, and then obviously since then we're in a new sort of environment around the Provincial Growth Fund and contracts confirmation. So when we went through this next round of a review, we looked at that level of uncertainty and brought it back to medium.
Great, thank you. Rateable units, that's almost a wee bit, Larry, back to the growth issue, the mesh blocks, etc. Although rateable units are slightly different to population. But that probably is relatively fixed at this stage. Rates affordability is an assumption, particularly on the part of council. Yes, Pat.
In that box under rates affordability and in the new script, could we either have Gisborne district or Gisborne/Tairāwhiti, because it just says Gisborne and it ought to mean our whole region has a high level of deprivation. So just to make it clear, it's in the little red box of new words.
Yeah.
I don't mind how you describe it, just to make it clear that it's the district as a whole.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Economic growth, again, that's probably I mean, you'll always be monitoring economic growth, but my sense is that the settings there are probably fine. Climate change, which actually certainly the Auditor General has made a strong plea that every council consider, and we have to, I think, given probably where we exist here. Again, probably relatively set in terms of your planned work. The assumptions aren't going to change in the next 3 months as far as we know. Earthquakes permitting, or anything. Well, I suppose it's not climate change, is it? We're okay there. Coast, and that would be the same, turning over to page 70, 71 around the coastal environment and also the carbon footprint. Yes, certainly, Sandra, welcome.
Hoping to get some clarification, if I could, around the price of carbon, and it's really just the commentary there. We talk about it being sort of the environmental aspect, if you like, but there's no commentary there on the impact of a rate take from devalued forestry blocks. So if forestry is locked up for carbon farming and devalued accordingly, there will be an impact on our rate take. So I just wondered if there was a place for
impact on who pays, or an impact on total, pardon?
Yeah, it's on the next page.
Be an impact on who pays, correct? I mean, you're going to reallocate the total rate pie differently because it's going to be based on valuations, I think is what you're saying. Yes, it's an impact, all right. Okay, well, price of carbon, sorry, there's the carbon footprint and there's the price of carbon. Okay, so thank you for that. I think it's been worth going through and a chance just to raise those questions. It seems to me, and Tim and Charlotte, not surprisingly, you've headed us in the right direction around sensitivity. I think I've heard two things that probably just, you know, we keep a beady eye on between now and the 3 months. One is, Larry, your point about those mesh blocks, you're going to come back to us just prior to the LTP adoption, just to check in that our assumptions around population are reasonable. And as you quite rightly have done, there is that ongoing monitoring of what is the state of the contracting environment and our capacity to deliver on capital. Probably unlikely to move from this point, other than you are reflecting the sensitivity that we have generally around delivery on a year out basis. So that's really, really helpful. Thank you for that. Can I move us to the recommendations, please, on page 46, simply that we note the contents of this report. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Larry. Put the motion that we note the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Morning tea. Do we normally break now? Morning tea, but I'm quite comfortable. I'm in the hands of you guys. It's your meeting. Is that appropriate? Can we do that? How long do we take? Half past 10 we come back? Half past 10? I apologise that actually I got way late at the table. It was superb. Thank you for whoever provides the morning tea. It's wonderful. And also means, Terry, doesn't it, that we are we're going now. We're fed, not fed up. We're fed, and we're ready to roll. We're on page 73 of our agenda, which is the sensitive expenditure report. Important little report. The primary purpose, in my view, of this is that we just get a sense: are we in the right place with our areas of sensitive spend, rather than necessarily a fine point line by line analysis. Are we balancing right? So, Mel, are you speaking to this? Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you. So we reviewed the sensitive expenditure policy for elected members in 2019, and part and parcel of that is reviewing the costs and reporting those back. So we've done that for the 1920 financial year, and the costs are 47K. But I think that it's really important to note that a large proportion of the costs relate to mileage, which is unavoidable due to some of the elected members living up the coast, Ruatoria and Tolaga Bay, but also that Gisborne is really isolated, and so when we do have to travel, often it's a lot higher costs. We have often have to have overnight stays, etc. So I think putting that into context with it as well. Were there any questions?
Thank you for that. Yes, are there questions folk would like to raise? Yes, Andy.
The ultimate trivia. On page 75, I just don't understand. We've got 4 new councillors. I don't understand why you've got one bracketed, replace Malcolm McLean. What's that got to do with anything?
And that was going to be my point, and left out Graham Thompson replaced Kerry was not replaced Graham, so why did we put that there at all?
I sense some political sensitivities here, which is fair enough, Andy. Thank you. I'm sure we get that accuracy in there.
Yeah. I think
okay. Anything else about this report that people would like to raise questions about? From my perspective, as your external member, this looked eminently suitable. In fact, I wonder why it wasn't more, to be honest, to be truthful. This covers a whole bunch of key ranges of work done by people and by councils that struck me as incredibly frugal. I take it, and the thing I was looking for, and I just raise it at the risk of stirring things up, this also includes any training and development for council members? I suggest there wasn't much going on.
To be fair, for March, April, for 3 or 4 months, so that we didn't go anywhere. So we also need to take into account it is quite low.
Yeah.
Because of COVID, we Zoomed. We didn't travel, and that would have been our busiest time of year. We would have our 20 consultation meetings. I would be going up the coast 20 times, so that time is not reflected in this.
And we did our training in-house rather than travelling to expensive.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point, Pat.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Larry.
Just one question. When we do our trip up the coast for 2 days, does that go under this expense, or is that under a different?
No, because you go on a bus.
Okay. Yeah, we go on a bus, but we've got accommodation.
If it's valid council business,
He does got the answer to that.
Oh, sorry. Is that Heather?
Through you, Chair, it was included as an induction cost.
Induction cost. Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Well, anyway, well done. I don't know if we need to. I don't sense there's a need for us to dwell too much on this. This is. Thank you, Red. You mentioned the COVID thing. We've got an explanation about actually some of the other expenses, which it's right to have a view about where they're at. I think we are of the view, and I guess I'll test it by the motion, that we're comfortable with the settings as we have achieved them at this stage. So I'm looking at the resolution on page 73, which is simply at this point that we note.
I'll move this.
Thank you, Riet. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Larry. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Move us to the internal audit report update. Melanie, you're still here. Well done. Page 89. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very important report.
So the last few months for internal audit has been really busy. But just to answer the earlier question around the NEMA claims, yes, we have fully received all the funding from NEMA, claim 2 and 3. Just going to our program of work on page 93. So with the parking infringement and the Olympic pool, those have both been completed. And apologies, going forward, we will have a brief summary of the recommendations from any internal reviews that we've done. But just to talk to the parking one, most of the recommendations there were low to medium and priority around process and procedure updates and documentation. The Olympic pool cash handling, that involved just looking at their processes. We found really good administrative processes down there. And so it was just basically reinforcing the good practices with the new staff that are coming on board. Just going through the stimulus package that is coming to an end. The report was due in February, but it's been pushed out to April. And we're continuing with our oversight of the Olympic pool funding and the Waipawa funding. So we've started working with managers there as well. Were there any questions?
Thank you for that, Melanie. And look, thank you for the table. It might be, I actually haven't gone back, but this is possibly the first time I've seen it, so I think it's very good that we get it. I'm a diagram type of guy. It gives me a good sense about where things are going. So thank you for that. Are there questions that people would like to raise for Melanie about the internal audit program? I think the critical thing for me, and this really, I would like to reflect, goes back to a discussion we had at our last meeting, was internal audit is really important for us as members to be able to get a window in on areas where, if you will, they are Nadine's and they are operational, but they are real risks to the performance of the committee. And of course, as we are well trained, and as it should be, we shouldn't meddle in operational matters. But we are still responsible as a council for the overall management of risk within the organisation. So internal audit is one of the key areas where we get a window in on the operations and can get assurance that actually the shop internally is going well. So I do rate this, and I do reflect that I think in your paper, Melanie, that you've indicated quite correctly that the 3-year program, which I am looking for in terms of actually do we have the right sort of, or looking for the right sorts of assurance going forward, will be something that we can discuss and develop once we've done our work this afternoon around the top 10 risks, which I think is superb. In other words, we can have some greater drive and work with Nadine over where the internal audit resource is allocated, which is superb. Are there any other questions then that people would like to make? Mine's not a question, obviously, it's a rambling statement.
Well, good, I'm happy to move this back.
Thank you, Riette. So we're going to move that we note the report. Can I have a second, please? Thank you, Terry. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Thank you, Mel. Can we move then to the Rocket Kotahi investment audit, please, on page 94. Do you speak first, or who's going to talk to this? You, Mel? And then I think.
Yeah, so if I may, through the chair, you've been handed out the 2018 investment audit report, just a summary, so you can see how the team has tracked in terms of the areas of improvement. We didn't capture that in the covering report, so you can see that there has been some improvements in areas.
I think if I can help, Nadine, you want to compare and contrast that with the colour of the table on page 100 of your agenda paper. The yellow and the orange dominated our 2018 report, whereas it's changed substantially for the better in the current report on page 100. So with that, I think that makes some sense.
Having said that, Mr. Chairman, the overall rating's not changed. Yeah. If we look at the paper on page 100, the overall cumulative comment at the back of the bottom of the audit rating is exactly the same as the overall rating on this page that we've just been provided with.
checking that I'm in the right place, sorry, Pat, on page 100.
Yes, I mean, I'm only just observing. I hear what
Yeah.
you're saying, and
Yeah.
there is less yellow, but the overall rating at the bottom says some improvement needed. And on the document we've just been handed, the overall rating said some
Oh,
improvement
sorry,
needed.
yes,
So the
I
points
was
are
missing
still
this,
the same.
the overall rating, yes.
Yes, so if you can refer, so sorry, if I might just refer yourselves to the actual report itself, which outlines the criteria for that assessment. And so on balance, where we have effective systems, if there is still a yellow area, the overall rating will still be something needs to be improved in here, and we can note that. But I think that in terms of the progress that the team has made over the last couple of years, or actually 3 years now, has improved in areas, and we can see that.
And
Mel,
I
is there
think they
anything
ought to-
else that you wanted
sorry.
to add to that?
I think they should have acknowledged that, because in actual fact, you've got 4 effectives in this latest report. And that's not been acknowledged in the summary.
So I take your point, Pat, you're critical of Waka Kotahi and their grading process rather than necessarily the substance. I think what Nadine's trying to show that actually our general housekeeping ability here is better than it was in 2018. Mel, sorry, you've got more points to make?
Through the chair, yeah, just with the, just around the rating assessment, I think it's important to note that the financial management area is more of a high risk than the ones that, the ratings that we've got this time around. So the level of risk is a lot lower with what we've got now. But yeah, I think overall it was a really good result.
So look, I think that's something that's good and high level. Can I just, perhaps for the benefit of the meeting, can we just target ourselves to the actual recommendations? You've got them there in paragraph 9. Are we comfortable about paragraph 9 of page 96? That's in the staff paper, Mel's paper. Are we comfortable with the progress that's being made against those recommendations? There's nothing there that suggested to me, by the way, but I'm just wanting to perhaps drive our discussion in the right areas, correct?
Yep.
And look, perhaps because I'm not quite over the detail, Mel, can you just help me with one other question in going back to the 2 coloured diagrams? Contract management, which was essentially question or area 4, same colour, needing some improvement. Can you just, are you able to amplify why they've said that, and in fact we haven't moved between the 3 years? You can take it offline, or David, are you able to help us?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I was waiting for Mel to see if you wanted to add anything before I did. So for public transport, which is the biggest one there around significant improvement needed, that's the smart card system that we're currently working to at the moment. So we have a process underway for that one. So that one is in train. All of the other things that are there, we have already started. So that's the total mobility and the public transport. So we have schemes in place to replace that now. That's in the RLTP, and that's budgeted for the changes there. For the contract management, we've covered off the concerns that have been raised there already. They were small operational ones, so we've already addressed those as part of our reporting.
Okay, sorry, is there any calling?
Just say that the contract management was a minor part of it, was road safety. It's a 200 odd K of the whole program, which you've got the substantive amount of it, but they raised across the whole of it as some improvement of a portion. So it's very, in terms of dollar terms, a lot lower, probably 2%.
That's a very good context. Thank you for that, Pauline. That's good. Yes, Pat.
Thank you. Can I just ask, and it's really through you, Mr. Chairman, so this document, 18233, is actually the report that's referred to from May 2017? And I imagine it might have taken that long to give it back to us. Because on page 103, the report from the previous procedural audit of May 2017, but this is dated 2018. So is that report? And I wouldn't be surprised if it is.
You should be an auditor, Pat. That's a good question.
Well, I'd expect it probably to be it. And I also think that if that's the case, nobody seems to know, does council have the opportunity to go back to Whakakotahi? Because in actual fact, when they report to us on this green page already, which is page 100, they say there's previous audit issues were not available. And in actual fact, you've got them here on a piece of paper. So, I mean, seriously, does council have the ability to respond back to Whakatahi and say, hang on a minute, here's a bit of information that we've provided or you've provided to us that ought to be contained. Otherwise, it looks like fevered audit issues not applicable or we've never had them.
Yes, we do have the ability to go back. We would need to check in with staff as to whether or not they've already commented back on this particular audit. And that is the 2017 one that they refer.
Yes, that would have been finalised in 2018. I'm not surprised. Thank you. I just had one other question, I guess, because I chair the RTC committee. I took a close interest in this. And this is page 104, where we say at the last box under the top half of the page, working towards improvements in the tender process, which will include council policy on late proposals. And I've written to a question about when, because I'd imagine that is just an important process of modus operandi. You either accept late proposals or you don't.
Great. And
we would have been doing it for years. So have we ever had a process around late proposals? What did it look like? And why are we still including a policy on late proposals if we've not had one?
So through the chair, that's contained within the procurement policy and guidelines that's adopted by council in December of last year. So when it comes to late tenders, this can be where somebody has had an error, normally with GETS, the government electronic tendering system, where something hasn't been able to be loaded in by the 5 p.m. cut-off time. The discretion sits with the relevant director as to whether or not to let things through. We've let things through if someone can show evidence that there was a problem with GETS and they weren't able to put it through, but it's not for tenders that come in well after the closing date. It's normally something that comes in about 7 minutes past 5 or something like that, when we'll look at see why it was late and then decide whether or not we'll let it go through.
Yes, so actually, we are better prepared and managed than this paper would present, because it sort of sounds like we don't have a process. We're working towards improvements in the process, but in actual fact, you've highlighted, Mr. Wilson's highlighted several items that actually are good management and we would have been doing for years. So maybe that needs to be responded to with respect as well, because otherwise it can leave the impression that we don't know what we're doing.
I agree.
And
That was one that crossed my mind when I was preparing for the meeting.
Couple of comments. So someone will come back to us on whether we've got the ability to respond back to Whakatahi on the things that they've left out.
Yes, I would think through the chair there are the staff comments that are already provided in here, but whether that's been finalised through NZTA, we will need to check.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this, look, I actually want to say, Pat, let's, the report's the report. The critical thing is it's actually given us a chance to raise, as you have, good questions, and we can internally achieve some comfort that actually, even though they might characterise it as something that can be irksome given it's a public document, we actually have a matter under control. Now, I agree, we'd love them to acknowledge it, and if there is a chance, Mel or David, let's see if we can do that. But let's also take the confidence from the sorts of questions we've raised this morning.
Does this report get presented to RTC, or what's the role and function of a report like this back to GDC? I'm not saying it should, I'm just curious. No.
Through the chair, the report comes to Audit and Risk. It doesn't go to Regional Transport Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I move to page 94 of the agenda, which is that we note the report. Thank you, Pat. Do I have a seconder,
can
please?
we note that there will be some inquiry with respect to?
Yeah. So, Pat, well, can we put a second point to this, please? Firstly, that we note or receive the report. Secondly, we note improvements made, but also that Whakatahi are asked to reconsider. Is that effect? I mean, essentially, that's what you want for the public record. We'd like a little greater accuracy, a greater degree of accuracy in the final assessment. So, thank you, Andy. Appreciate that. So, somebody hopefully has got that sense of what is the second bit, which actually.
Can I try this through Chairman Coral? Note that Whakatahi be invited to make some improvements to the final report.
Yes. Yep, that's good. That's all we can do. Thank you. So with that, I'll put Pat's motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Oh, Andy was the seconder. Right, could we please move to the a very interesting report, the Compliance and Monitoring and Enforcement Report. Gary, I take it, welcome, and appreciate if we could hear from you, please, about this very interesting report.
Kia ora, everyone. For those that don't know me, my name is Gary McKenzie. I'm the Monitoring and Compliance Manager at Gisborne District Council. The report you have before you, I tell you the report has been read, but some key points I just want to make is you'll know from the report that there's certain bits of information reporting from the metrics report. What I want to mention on that is during the reporting on the CMA metrics report, there was certain information that we were unable to obtain. We had a good idea of what the figures were. I contacted the company Sprout, who is responsible for collating the information. I had a long discussion with them around the figures we had. They felt that because we were unable to actually quantify the figures themselves, it was best to just leave those areas blank, even though that we had a good understanding of where the figures were. So that's why you'll see in the report that the certain areas are kept blank. You also note in the report that in terms of numbers of consents monitored, that looks quite low. To put some context around that, the question was asking about each individual consent that was monitored. It didn't drill down as to the number of multiple inspections that consent would require. Quite often, a lot with our high risk activities, we deal with a lot of individual inspections for one particular consent. So it didn't really give us much of a kind of greater understanding of the number of consents we were monitoring. Also, with the act, well, at the time, we were still in a development stage of a new compliance team. So what we've done now is we've introduced a lot more programs around consent monitoring, education programs, and that sort of reflects more on the kind of snapshot that I included in the report, which gives a better understanding of where we are sitting just now. And I think as well, just to note on the number of consents monitored, it also doesn't take into account the number of RFSs that the compliance staff were having to deal with. So when an RFS comes in, the compliance staff who deal with the monitoring also has to deal with the RFSs. So that can quite often take up quite a lot of time, and that reflected in the figures. Plus also we had the issues of COVID, which prevented a lot of compliance monitoring going on at the time. But other than that, I think it's good to highlight as well with the request for services. Any request for service that comes in, we do monitor. The report drilled down as to the numbers that were actively monitored to the numbers that were actually dealt with. We deal with all RFSs, which is why the figures are 100%, but we weren't able to get a figure for the numbers that were actively, like site inspections, but I would estimate that to be around 90 to 95%. But other than that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Gary. Appreciate that. Do we have questions for Gary at this stage, or for Helen, I think, presume as well, from within her area? Yes, Terry.
Thank you. Just on 112, the freedom camping, as these figures do not include infringements, how many would be freedom camping infringements?
We decided not to report on the number of infringements that we issued for freedom camping.
Why not?
Yeah, different legislation. This was purely around the Resource Management Act. It was to do with legislation around compliance, consent monitoring. So that's why we decided to keep the number of infringements for freedom camping separate, so it didn't mix the results.
Okay.
Okay, Pat.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that it's a challenging area and that we have got some work to do. But can you just give us a rough, on page 112, a rough idea of what the 109 non-consented activities were that we monitored? So I don't want to know individually every one of them, but just a range of what types of activities were they?
Like the non-consented activities actually comes as a result of
Yeah, no, I know, I get all that. I just mean, what were they? Like building without a consent, digging a hole, what, just a rough broad spectrum of what they were, not how you got there. Yeah, I understand that. Can you just tell me roughly what they were? Just a range of what they were. Thank you. 109 is quite a few. I think it would be really helpful, Mr. Chairman, if we perhaps could have that proceeds another time, just because that it falls outside a category of all of the things we normally know that we monitor. Thank you. It's a really useful report. It is disappointing that we aren't able to provide information that some of our other unitary authorities about a similar size to us are able to provide, but we have had explained to us numerous times how challenging our monitoring department and staffing that monitoring department is.
I wanted to ask if I could just, well, sorry to bring you to point. I wanted to follow up a request on that, because I don't doubt this is probably significant effort, but clearly the regional sector as a group through the SIG has decided this is actually important. I probably think I could rationalise why it is important, but can you tell me why it's important we're involved in this? Why is it important that, because this is on the LGNZ website, we're being public with our performance, I'd like to know the value proposition.
The understanding of it being public and being available to everybody. So because with the whole area of compliance, it's quite a topical issue, and what we want to be at council is we want to be open and transparent with what we are actually doing with our CME function. And that's the basis of why it's, you know, the CME metrics report has been made available for people to look at.
Cool. So I guess I am looking at my members. We're comfortable. I mean, this takes, I suspect, Nadine, substantial effort. And I presume it will be an exercise repeated by the SIG on an annual basis?
Yes, and sorry, just to add further to what Councillor Seymour said, since this metrics report, we've started documenting the information better, whereas we might not have IT capability to drill down to what we were expected to do last year. We've manually started recording information so that for this year's CME metrics report, there's no reason why there's going to be anything left blank. We'll have the information readily available.
Great. Nadine, sorry, I'm conscious that you probably have a few comments you want to make. So.
Yeah, and I think off the back of that, in terms of the regional sector and the approach that it's been taking to compliance monitoring and enforcement, is that this is helpful in terms of metrics to compare where we sit, not only around our monitoring and compliance area, but around the resourcing that we have, the geographical distance that we have to cover, and the number of consents that we also have to monitor relative to those FTEs. And you can see where there are comparable unitary authorities, they've got a smaller area within which they work with, and some have more resources. So I think that's something that the council needs to be clear of. We're probably short 3 FTEs, I would say, relative to some of the other places for our regional function, let alone what we've got to monitor in our district.
So it's helpful from that perspective. I must confess, for me, the value proposition is actually with RMA reform. With all that's going on, these are sorts of the what I call the bare bone facts, or we should have at our fingertips information that will be important as reform goes on, both as a council but also as a sector. So I take your point. It gives us a point of reference for comparing ourselves, but actually I think also we are part of the broader regional sector, and it's important that we demonstrate we are on top of it. So I am interested also, and you've already explained what you're doing to perhaps fill the gaps, Gary. It would be nice to think there could be a better systemic response than manual calculation. But in the interim, that's certainly important. Pat, I think you've got your hand up.
Thanks very much for the response, but we have issued some infringements and we have done some enforcement orders. So they don't show on this page of the metrics for the Gisborne District, page 180. And it shows no infringement. We all know over the last, and it's not even if this is 2 years ago, we have issued infringements and we have issued enforcement orders. So I just wonder how they got missed out, because it does make us look like we don't do anything.
Yeah, if I, through chair, it was quite specific in terms of the timeframes, in terms of, we had the financial year that we had to report on, and whereas, yes, we have got enforcement orders, the enforcement order that we have got, that was outside of the time frame for what could get put down on the CMA metrics report.
Thank you.
So we have obviously, there's prosecutions we've taken, there's enforcement orders, but we couldn't report on them in that CMA metrics report because it was outside of that time frame.
My apologies that my phone was not on silent. Bad form. Right, where are we at, folks? Any more questions that you'd like to make of Gary at this stage? Right, useful report, Gary. Thank you very much, and appreciate you putting this up. It's useful because it's public as well, and hopefully we start to drive one or two things off this in the way that you've suggested, Nadine, which is really important. Could I refer us, please, to page 112, which is the recommendation, which is essentially that we note the contents of the report. Thank you, Pat. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Josh. So we note the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you. Can we, well, it seems like a reasonably quick item for such a lot of paper, but I do appreciate that. Can we move, please, to the next item? Which I've got rightly. On the page, it's insurance. Pardon? Thank you very much. Which is our insurance update. Thank you, guys. G'day, how are you? Andrew.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, all. My name is Andrew Hoy. I have been with the council coming up 1 year. My role here is Senior Procurement Advisor. I wear a few hats within council. I look after the insurance, so I'm here today, and I look after a few major projects within the council.
Andrew, would you like to speak to your report? Is there anything you want to draw to our attention, please?
Okay, so basically we have insurance that covers a lot of council's assets, infrastructure. Our main insurer is Aon Insurance. We're part of a major BOPLAS consortium of other councils, and they have done a review of our insurance again through COVID. Sort of it was up and down with where prices could go. I can report we received a 12% increase in our insurance costs. We do have to realise that valuations have risen, and that is part of it. And we did add some insurance for the new Harbour Masters boat.
Add onto that. Some of the changes that you had asked at the last report when we had the insurance was with regards to the Harbour Master, anything with regards to wreck exposure, and what was the assessment of what we were exposed to as a region. To get it quantified as we could of that assessment. There's two parts of it. Apart from the initial report that was done a little while ago with Navigatus,
there has been nothing updated as such with it. But the other part of that side of it is that even if we did get an assessment, the insurers are not willing to extend any coverage in that area. And so some of the things when we talk about the exposure that could be or whatever that may be happen in those particular areas, the possibly, so for argument's sake, you had a wreck off the shore or something that was say $100 million, which is the large tanks that come off at the moment there around our coastal area. The majority of times those are insured. And so therefore it would be similar to what our exposure, if you like, that are not insured or your deductibles is around 5% or 10% of that. So in terms of that, the quantums that you have, it may be either 5 million or 10 million. If there was nothing there, you would probably go back to the company itself for the third party, but we have a cover for up to 5 million. Now, just bear in mind that is in a year. So if there were 2 wrecks, that the second one would be at 100% of our sort of cost if we could not get it from the others. So that's, we don't have cover the financial impacts to mitigate any of those, but that's sort of giving you a sort of a broad brush of what that is without any insurance policies.
So the Jody F Millennium ran, I just arrived there, so 20 years ago. And did we have any, because something like that will nearly never happen. So do you feel we are covering, the chance that it is happening is very low. So there's, but then the impact would be massive. So do you feel this is appropriate cover for something that might never happen? Can Pauline answer?
In terms of, I think that's why we got that policy. Before we didn't have as much cover before the journey was recognising that there was a risk and that any exposure to that or of any of those companies that weren't insured to the full extent or they went bankrupt and you didn't get it, it was to make sure that you had that 5 million revenue with it. So in terms of that, it's how long is a piece of string. The likelihood of it, and we haven't, hasn't occurred, but the impacts of it, if it does, it is quite a large financial, but there are mitigations in those points that you can go back to the original company, that there are other insurers of their companies, and then there's ours to cover any shortfall as well.
Are ships allowed to carry freight or go out and do business if they do not have insurance? That's just out of interest. I'm asking if they are allowed to even operate without appropriate insurance. Not that you would know that, but
no, we were talking yesterday with Aon about that, and what they were giving, they're saying that all of those insurers that they did have to have a public indemnity with it. It would be if someone's operating outside of that, but he was giving assurance at that stage that there would be unlikely big. They're the big tankers, but that's the majority that come through our coast was deemed to be the major risk associated with that in the flow.
So then just a supplementary question. When the Rena ran aground in Tauranga 5 or 6, or maybe it's 10 years now, I can't remember, do we know if what the process was there and if the council was involved in all, or if the boats, the ships, I should not say boats, ships insurance covered it all?
Off the top of my head, but I don't think it did cover everything. Yeah, they would have, I don't know the quantities, but I don't think it covered everything.
If I may, through the chair, in 2018, the Regional Sector Chief Executives commissioned a piece of work around our collective liabilities around for harbour master for the wreck removal. So it might be worthwhile trying to bring that document back so the council has an understanding around what we are liable for and why. I think there's, there seems to be questions around whether we even need it. So just giving us some of that background might help.
Because what I want to say is we want cover if it's needed, but we do want to make sure we have appropriate cover for something that might never happen, but we do want to have that option. So I would love for us to take a look at that. Thank you.
So this red is actually the balance of where do we want the risk to lie? Okay, and I mean, that's if, and I also note on this, if I've got this correct and I'm looking at the right one, there is a limit to what the market would be prepared to bear for us, and that's in paragraph 28 of the report. This raises an interesting point, which is that this is a report which is showing what insurance we have purchased for actually the current year. Pauline, I'm conscious that if I've read this correctly, and I think I remember it's from last year, it's going to be 1 November that there is a renewal. So I wonder if there is a place for the committee to be able to have a look at actually prospectively what we will buy, if that's the right word, and really effectively have that risk discussion about actually what risk we are or we aren't prepared to carry. So that would be ideally before we go out and buy for 1 November. I think Larry, you had a question, and then Terry, and then Sandra.
We've just gone through 3 major earthquakes last week, and under here on page 195, we've got material damage excluding fire of now 259,500 odd. My question is, does this covering earthquake, and then in the infrastructure column underneath it, it says declared values have risen 3% due to requests from insurers to include costs associated with removing damaged assets, e.g. earthquakes. So I'm reading this and thinking, okay, are assets only insured against removing damaged assets, or are they insured against earthquakes totally? I mean, I know we've got EQC, but I'm not quite sure how this works with councils. One would, I mean,
I don't answer that, yeah. So on that page, which is 119, it's divided into the top 2 is material damage, excluding fire, and material damage with fire, because there is a different risk associated with earthquakes as opposed to fire. Yeah. And so, and also the way that the damage may occur with those sort of things. So those are separated. And then there's the 4th line down is also the infrastructure insurance, which is below ground assets. So all your reticulated pipes, all of those kind of things. So in terms of that, yes, it would include removal of those kind of things depending on what the assets were and depending on what the event was. But bearing in mind the deductibles for each of those are different. Yeah. So for argument's sake, the infrastructure one it's everything that's an event. So if there was an earthquake and they call it an event over 72 hours, anything, and there was 2 or 3 earthquakes within that time, that's one event. And so that deductible, which they're saying is 1.5 million. Bearing in mind, this doesn't take into account anything that you may get from central government. Right. So their share, if it is an emergency declared on that, is 60%. And so in terms of that, they would cover some of that deductibles, but not all of it. So the exposure, for argument's sake, of a major event occurring of something that within the infrastructure, the amount that we could expect to do, because central government have a deductible too, and it's based on our rating and the values of that, is about a 1.7 million. It was a major event that we would be expected to pay.
Right. So that means all our, basically all our infrastructure is covered. Yeah.
Well, it's covered, I think, Larry, it's covered for what we think would be a probable loss.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean to say necessarily that we carry the equivalent of replacement cost. Yeah. It means we should be thinking about what is the most likely probable loss. Then we have to take into account where would be the sources of. That's a bit of a worry. We're okay. We'd have to take. Thank you, David. We'd have to take into account what may be other possible sources of, I guess, remediation, which is the 60%. At least it's a cabinet minute that actually we all go on, which means how would we meet our 40%? So that's where we have obviously pitched at the $250 million worth of cover. Because presumably that would cover what we would think, at least in a maximum probable loss, would be something equivalent to 40%.
Yeah.
That or use of our balance sheet, in other words, taking on debt.
And on top of that, you say there's a national rating. So obviously the national rating would be based upon our earthquake risk profile, which is higher than most regions. I mean, because we're a major fault line running through here, our profile of risk would be higher on a national scale.
That is correct. The actual, in terms of that excluding the fire, material damage excluding fire, we do pay higher for earthquakes. We've got a higher risk associated with, so therefore, compared to some of the others within our own even region, BOTLESS, we do pay higher.
Thank you. Mine was actually back around the shipping thing, thinking about my 10 years with AMP. But is it worth understanding what the port has around shipping? Because I'm well aware of a clause about a ship under tow, and the Jodiac Millennium was under tow, getting taken out when it got into trouble, great difficulty out here. So I just wondered, is there a crossover with the port, what it has in coverage and responsibility, and how you would know whether a company ship is insured or not that comes into our port? I don't know how that would be monitored or managed, but past the subject now, but yeah.
So I wonder, Terry, if I could leave that as an open question, because in some senses I say we're getting a report on what we have rather than actually what we could buy going forward. So Pauline, I think what I'm trying to reflect here, very helpful report in the sense, and Andrew, very helpful report in terms of a sense of where we're at and what we've got. But I think the risk discussion we'd really have, which is our settings right, should come up ideally in a meeting prior to us going to market towards 1 November. Yes, Pat. Oh, sorry, Sandra, you've got it as well. You're after Pat. Okay. You go first, please, Pat.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the forestry, and I know this is what we have, but we have less forest since we've harvested a good deal of palm oil. So has that been reflected? And we're talking, and so I see what is covered in there. And then I just want to make sure that under our liability, which we're the public liability, have you got the forest covered in there if they were set alight and cause damage to other people's assets? So there's two aspects of forestry in here.
I believe that the forestry cover covers the liability as well.
Well, it doesn't say that, does it? In the
No,
script?
it doesn't say that, but we'll come back to double sure. I know that in the past that what was, unless they've actually changed those kind of things. And yes, the actual value of the forest, the value is at the 30th of June. So, and it says, okay, are you harvesting any of that? Do you take that into account for the actual cover? So yes, we do that update of the lots.
Appreciate that, but I think while it mentions caused from harvest area caused by fire, it doesn't under forestry note any public liability to others. So I think we do need to be clear about that, because even private landowners have public liability on their forests.
Sorry, I did overlook you. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pat's touched on the forestry one, which I had written down here, but the other one I did wonder about, and I appreciate your comment around the fact that we need to be looking forward to things in our next meeting, but was around coastal retreat and the insurance industry implicating that they're, or advising that they're not going to continue to insure coastal assets. So does that impact on us and our assets on the coast?
So if I clear, this is about our own Gisborne District Council assets. Are we fully insurable, or have we got stuff that's excluded? That's your question, isn't it?
Yeah, so turning on where our assets are, they would haven't asked specific questions. Is there sort of inundation? Is there anything that there may be in any of the areas? They haven't specifically asked that. I would imagine that there may be questions in the future asking out the each individual assets, how close are they to any of those particular areas. In terms of this, and as part of the other things, we will probably closer to the renewal stage is actually have Aon come back to the committee just to go over those things and to bring up the other point that their process that they're doing immediately within the next 2-3 months is to actually look at the process of whole insurance. It doesn't matter when insurance went down low, but when insurances keep on going up, then they look at what is the comfort level for deductibilities and what is the implications of that, what is the things with our own assets when you're looking at them, should they be insured? In one stage as we had conveniences insured, we said that they are all individual areas and that the likelihood and the cost of those that we didn't need to insure them. So there is a range of strategies that we will come back to and they will explain what are the impacts of it. The last time when we started to look at that, when insurances were probably back in 2009, we were at over the 1 million, but that was nearly at 1 million then. They went down to about 500K. But at that stage, we were looking to double the deductibles, but it didn't change anything for the premiums. So part of that work is we'll be coming back to you with Aon to explain those options for you to consider.
Might also add, so in response so the Insurance Council's submission on climate change was highlighting areas that local government needed to be aware of in terms of its planning around climate change. And so that would filter through around the insurance decisions, also the level of risk, but also how we manage our assets that are susceptible to coastal erosion, for example.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Andy.
What's our claims history like? And with these deductibles, I mean, that's part of claims as well. Some of them are pretty high. You know, the transformers in excess of 20,000, deductibles 10,000. So, you know, so if your claim is quite close to the value of the thing, it's not a lot in there. So, but yeah, just do we make a lot of claims? Just going through those deductibles, in layman's terms, it's excesses, isn't it?
And some of the things we can come back with probably the history of some of that because that helps as part of your decision making. But the vehicles is about 500 as a deductible, so it's quite low. But it depends on the other deductibles, say like for material damages around 25K. And so for that section, everyone. So part of that risk, which would come back and you say, what is the framework that you want, is what is the risk that we can afford? What is risk that we can't afford? And we want the cover to at least do that. And so we'll probably also contemplate what if, because material damage is on each and every address. So this is one address. The Lawson Fields is another address. So the cumulative deductibles adds up. And so that's the kind of realising what is the financial impacts of those kind of decisions as well.
Yeah, just linking those two questions. I mean, in our world, if you make a few claims, your deductibles go up. So that's why I was sort of putting those two questions. Are we making a lot of claims? And if so, are our deductibles following them? Like, you're 12% on premiums, are the excess going at the same rate? That's all right.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. This response prompted me to ask, though, doesn't Gisborne Holdings insure this building, and do they insure Tupuia? Just where does the insurance on the assets that they manage on our behalf rest, or do we pay within our lease a contribution towards insurance, which I'd imagine we do?
Yes, so you're right, they own the building, but all operating costs associated with it comes back as to the gross lease back to us. So in effect, we will be paying those higher costs of premiums.
But we don't choose the insurance, they choose it. I'm just getting this clear in my head. If they're insuring it, we just pay it within our lease.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Near the owner.
We did actually, for some who've got a long memory, we did have a debate about self-insuring when Brian Wilson, you would remember, Andy, Councillor Cranston, when Brian Wilson chaired Finance and Policy and Audit, we had a debate about whether we self-insured things like vehicles, and Ms. Foreman's been absolutely right in saying that once we went through the work, it didn't actually reduce the premium hugely. but it still is worth looking at as premium keeps on going up.
Well, and some of the war stories, Pat, are even with increased excesses being accepted, premiums are still massively going up. So I think I've certainly gained a sense that my suggestion has got a bit of traction, that Pauline, we can task you and Andrew with some work, that actually to have this sort of discussion with the prospective look at the next insurance year would be valuable, because I sense that we are quite keen to have a rich discussion around actually where does the risk lie, do we accept it, and heavens help me, even we go back to thinking about how much would we carry ourselves, and if we carry it, do we think indeed it's some form of self-insurance, which isn't abnormal for particularly some of the regional councils around the country. Okay, can we please move to page 193, which is we note the content. Can somebody move that, please? Thank you, Larry. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Pat. So I'll put the motion that we receive the report. I don't think we need to note that we'll look forward to the coming back over this, Pauline, if we can add that actually to our work program, that would be better. So I'll put the motion that we received the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Right, we could move to the health and safety report. David, that'd be great. Thank you. If you could give us a snapshot, and I know there was a wee bit of extra work we asked you to think about, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, Morona, everybody. You have the report in front of you, read through. Just want to allude to two or three points on that. As previously mentioned, contractor management is a real key one to us at Gisborne District Council. We've had a couple of serious incidents regarding contractors involved working for the council, which we've fully investigated and going through that process. So it is a key one for me and for council to actually take on as a risk, and there's a key risk at that as well. Has anyone got any questions on contractor management? Because I think it's a real key one. I think it's one that I'm carefully managing and using some of the lessons and recommendations which will come from the Tarifiti redevelopment re-employment scheme as well. I think that's there's going to be some good learnings from that.
This is if you go back to paragraph 9 from David, is one of the top 9 identified operational risks. Is actually contractor management. Are there any questions for David as far as this can see?
Correct. Contractor management's down there. It's probably right at the top, actually. If I put those in order of preference, I think contractor management will be a number 1 for me and 1 for council. Yeah. I think part of the learnings we've got as well on contractor management is the importance of a robust assurance and verification program on contractors, not just actually getting them to be SHE approved and to actually say they've got a documented health and safety process, that we actually follow up that, we verify that they're providing the service and doing the service right, and to give us assurances that we are comfortable in that they're doing their things right. So that is a key one. Secondly, I'd like to touch on the health and well-being of staff. I think that's a key one post-COVID. A lot of staff have struggled over the time, and we're just about to put some health, well-being, mental health and well-being training deployed to all staff. I've invited contractors as well to work with the collaboration in Gisborne, and I think that will be a useful initiative to the staff at council. Touch on point 24, Waikari White Island. Recently, I think it was on the 5th of March, it was reconvened. A further 3 parties have been implicated in that rather complex investigation, which will probably go on for another year. The next hearing is set for June, and I think there'll be some recommendations coming out in a year's time. Until then, I think we need to take due diligence and our duties around officers' duties, section 44, seriously. And to that effect, we're actually involving a lot of the directors to come down and actually take ownership and attend things like the Health and Safety Committee meetings, so they get an understanding of perception of the risks that some of the teams face on a day-to-day basis. Whilst you don't need to be experts, you do need to know about the risks and how those are managed. And I think that's where we're going down on those lines.
Can I just reflect on that, please, David?
Sure.
Who are you talking to when you were saying that? Are you saying, you've mentioned officers, I presume you mean councillors?
Councillors and managers.
I
Yes.
agree, and managers, your
Yes.
report
Yep.
sort of somewhat excludes, not exclude, but it doesn't directly mention elected members as
No,
officers.
but I think this is why we have the report, to actually look at what the main risks are, and so that you're aware of those risks and what's actually happening around council. Yeah.
So we have a duty as elected members, and dare I say, I've been advised even as an independent, to recognise that we are officers. So the due diligence obligations that are in paragraph 18, 19 and 20 are indeed as much written for us as it is for senior management, and indeed Nadine, who, as we know, is the hottest of all seats. So the critical question here that I'm really wanting to raise with you as individual and collectively as a committee is, are you comfortable that you understand key risks, the nature of our interventions and controls to manage that, and you've got some knowledge that you could understand that actually those controls are operating? Because that's actually your statutory obligation under section 44 of the Act. It's our obligation under section 44 of the Act.
I understand this, but I'm not sure that I understand how the controls are operating. But I would like to ask through you, Mr. Chairman, I mean, we've known for ages that the first threat, I'm looking on page 211, of abuse and threat to staff has always been one of the most prevalent, I guess. And can I just ask, in what areas, is it still dog control and enforcement in that type of environment? In the sense the word, and we know that you have, body cameras on those who need them most, but perhaps we should be asking what other things can council do, or is council doing as responsible people observing health and safety to limit or reduce that number, because that's quite a high number.
Yeah, good question, Pat, and it's one of a key one for us. You're right, we have got a lot of good controls in place, including the body cameras, tactical training and de-escalation training for the teams, but there are too many incidents happening. Recently, it's been more the parking enforcement and the animal control guys moving away from the libraries, but the libraries are overrepresented across New Zealand in relation to, unfortunately, a conflict and aggression and some unruly behaviours. What can we do about it? Socially, we've got a lot of homeless at the moment. We had an incident this morning where somebody was watching parking when they were cleaning the parking meters out. They were watching them to find out when they do it. So there was concerns to our staff about what's going on in relation to these people that are actually homeless around the city. So a social problem that needs to be addressed. Difficult with the police. The police sometimes arrest people, put them in for 20 minutes and then let them out again. So it's a recidivist offender kind of thing. It's happening all the time. The team are fully aware of it. They get some really good support from the teams. It's almost accepted, and it shouldn't be accepted, but there are too many incidents around town.
Sorry, if I could just add to that, things that we've put in place, we use our resources wisely, like having City Watch and making sure that we're using the City Watch team in the library environment as well has helped to, sort of have that presence and mitigate where the police can't be there all the time. So even where we've placed them or where they're housed. So we're looking across the board at different range of options that we can put in place in addition to what Dave's already mentioned. So, we do our best to mitigate these things, but you never know when they're going to happen or appear, people related. But making sure that with the requisite resources and that staff are well trained has been a big part of our risk mitigation approach.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I mean, the library probably isn't the focus at the moment because it's nice and warm and fine and sunny and you can be outside. I was here at 8:15 this morning to get my iPad working, and they were drinking in the park then. I watched someone take their bottle of beer out of the box. So at 8:15 in the morning, 4 people at one table and 2 at another, and those are become. But what we do have Manaaki Tairāwhiti and other organisations that are trying to work with the homeless or provide housing. So do we bring this kind of message? How do we use that vehicle to help us in that regard?
So through the chair, It's not always the homeless that are doing this. I think we need to be really clear about that. So, you know, there are, and we know what's happening across New Zealand, and people's threshold for, you know, the interactions that they're having with council staff around parking as well. The aggression has increased generally across society. So I think we should be careful about labelling as homeless that are exacerbating this. So to the point around Manaaki have been, you know, been looking at a number of issues around social harm and supporting families. So that is on the radar, but not related to harm against our staff in terms of health and safety. So
no, but it's harm generically.
Yes.
Bruce, because myself, Sam from the police, Jim from health, Tim from Toa Femen, Leslyn from Manaaki Tairāwhiti, we've got a dedicated group looking at the overall effect of how we can guide people into safer accommodation. We've done a lot during lockdown when the homeless shelter was established. So it's work in progress. This is not a new issue. It's been here for 20 years, but it is part of Manaaki Tairāwhiti's strategy going forward. The homelessness bit is added there. But I agree with Nadine, that is two separate issues we are dealing with, but they are interlinked.
Absolutely, and I wasn't suggesting it was just the homeless, it was brought up, but it's the alcohol from 8:30 in the morning creates an environment that then potentially puts our council officers more at risk than they might be than if people were, you know, doing something different. So that's the point. And then this last one that is quite substantial is the vehicles and traffic. So I mean, I'm sure we do all the driver training and health and tracing programs we need to for that, and our roads are risky.
Yeah, in response, we do heaps in relation to vehicle and driving, but I sometimes think we need to have some more individual responsibility. If you're going to do on a 500-mile drive up the coast, you check your car, you do the pre-start checks. We had an incident recently of a bald tyre. That shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen because the cars are regularly serviced, they're fit for purpose. But there is an individual accountability about checking your car. We do get a bit complacent in relation to new vehicles, beautiful vehicles. We get in, we expect them to be right, but there is a bit of accountability. So that's what I'm working on with teams to actually get their accountability, personal responsibility. Thanks.
So thank you for raising that, Pat. I don't think we should lose this issue. Thank you for being upfront saying, well, I'm not necessarily certain I know what the controls are. See, Section 44 says we should. So what I'd like us to do is to recognise a couple of things. One is we develop the reporting with David and we develop our understanding, but I also think this afternoon as we think about risks, I don't want to necessarily predict what we will come up with as our top 10 risks, but I can assure you from the chair, I will be a strong advocate that health and safety is one of our top risks. So I think in doing that, we then need to address, so how do we address that as a committee? So perhaps I'm really trying to say is I'd like to be able to, at this stage, receive the report, but actually recognise that we can't drop Pat's question because it's mine as well. Yes, James?
Sorry, one of the things that perhaps we'll do for the next reporting round, and remember this is an evolving process, I think this is only our third report to this committee, is recognising that we've got data around what the sort of incidents that are occurring in council. We can add some detail around the controls in place for that. So we've had a discussion just now around controls. So married with the diagrams, we'll in the next report ensure that, because this moves, right? Next week it could be something totally different. But for the reporting purposes, we'll add a section around control so you can understand what measures we're putting in place across the organisation to help mitigate the risk.
Thanks for that, James. Appreciate that. So look, if we could please then move to the resolutions on the resolution on page 205. Again, reasonably simple that we received the report. Do I have somebody prepared to move that, please? Thank you, Red. Is there a seconder, please? Thank you, Josh. Move that seconded that we note the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Right, if we could then please move to the procedural motion to exclude the public. For the reasons, thank you, Pat. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Terry. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much.